Hey, on this episode, we're going to talk about 5 ways that you can use storytelling to enhance your podcast and what we can learn from a major movie maker that is probably one of the best when it comes to creating dialogue for their movies. Let's get started.
Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what is happening and how are you doing? Hey, I want to say thank you so much for being here. I am Chris, and I'm from the original Chris and Christine Show podcast. You can find out every single thing that you might want to know about that show on the website, which I built. Yeah, check that out at chrisandchristineshow.com. And there's a link to it in the show notes of this very episode. Yeah, you scroll on down, and there it is. Check that out. Ta-da! But I want to know is, how are you doing? How is your podcast coming along? Do you even have a podcast? Maybe you're thinking about starting one, or maybe you have one, and you're trying to figure out how to make it sound more, how to make it sound awesome, really. Let's make an awesome sounding podcast, and I'm here to help you out. Let's do this. You know, because I create this show to help you create your show, I usually do not like to talk about all my successes and accomplishments here on the show. It kind of feels like it's like bragging a little bit, like I'm trying to brag, but I'm not trying to do that. So I usually keep those things off to the side. Like I don't usually like to brag too much on the podcast because literally and physically, it does you no good at all. Like how does me bragging about myself, how does that help you create your podcast? It really doesn't unless I can show you exactly what I have done so you can put those things in place in your show and perhaps maybe your show can be successful also. So this podcast, Podtastic Audio, has been ranked number 1 in the charts for many, many different weeks. It's not always ranked number 1, but I think I've been ranked number 1 probably at least 20 times or so, give or take, of the history of the podcast. And I want to say thank you so much for recognizing that I create this show for you, and I'm trying to help you make a better podcast. I want to say thank you so much. And I don't say this to brag or anything like that. I just want to say thank you, and I feel very humble when this show is actually, number 1 on the charts. Every time I see it, even though it's been like 20-something times or whatever, I always look at it and say, no way, people actually recognize me as creating something amazing for them that actually warrants a spot number 1 on the charts. And I want to say thank you so much. And just like last week, I was talking to another podcaster and they had told me something that was kind of crazy to think about because I never really thought about this explained to me in this way. They were telling me that when they're listening to the Chris and Christine Show podcast, that they did not think that show was actually an independent podcast, like an indie podcast. They didn't think I was an indie show because it sounded too good. It was so well produced. It sounded so amazing that they were like, there's no way they can be an indie show. They sound too professional. And that's exactly what I've been trying to do here with this show. And that is where this show came from, was from the Chris and Christine Show. And yes, we did that show on like literally a shoestring budget with basic gear and equipment. Eventually, yes, we have the Rodecaster Pro now, and eventually we've upgraded some stuff. Yes, I realize that. But for many, many episodes, we just did it with an old, simple audio interface with Audio-Technica microphones plugged right in, and we did it with Audacity. In fact, we still do it recording on Audacity, and I just learned a few tricks along the way, and I'm always listening to what the finished product sounds like. And I realize when I go back to some of those older episodes that we've done, like, episode 50, episode 60, somewhere around there, they sound much different than they do today. And I'm like, I don't think they sound that great. But like anything, usually your show is not going to be super evolved early on in your career, in your podcasting career, I should say. You kind of evolve as you go. So that's exactly what we did. We took it slow. We took it with basic equipment, basic cheap gear, and evolved to the next level of gear and then evolve to the next level beyond that. And I'm kind of sitting in a place right now where I feel very comfortable with the gear I have and even the microphones I have. Listen, I can, if I wanted to, I can buy a Shure SM7B microphone. I can buy 2 of them if I really wanted to, but I don't want to because I really do love these Rode pod mics we've been using. They deliver fantastic audio quality. They're pretty easy to use. They are XLR only. Sorry, you USB fans over there, but you can get one for only $100 and they sound great. I've got 3 of them. I got 3 of them. I even thought about buying a 4th one, really, if you think about it, because this Rodecaster can handle 4 people. Although I don't know if I ever had 4 people in this podcast room here I'm doing this in right now at the same time. I had 3. Yeah, I've had 3 people in the same room doing a show together, and it seemed to work out just fine. And these pod mics sound phenomenal. And also, to that note, with picking the right microphone, almost any microphone can sound amazing in post-production. Now, I said microphone. That does not mean Bluetooth, AirPods or speakerphone or things like that. I'm talking about actual real microphones. Any regular microphone, you can tweak it in post-production. Audacity's got a lot of cool plugins you can use. There's lots of cool other features out there on the web you can use to really enhance almost any microphone to make anything sound amazing. So, yes, a good microphone will help out, but you do not have to spend $500 or $1,000 on a microphone, especially for an audio podcast or any kind of podcast, really, because you can take the Rode Pod mic like I'm using right now, and I can enhance this even better. In fact, what you're hearing right now has probably been enhanced, and it sounds great, doesn't it? So almost every single podcast out there in existence, I would say kind of fall into 2 camps, 2 categories, really. You fall into the educational, learning, teaching camp, advice giving, like, trying to help you accomplish a task. They will do a podcast as like a teaching mode to kind of show you and tell you, kind of like this show here is kind of like a teaching show where I kind of help you create a better podcast by telling you tips and tricks on how to do that. And then the second category, I would say, really is everything falls into the entertainment space. You're merely doing a show to be entertainment. You are talking about funsy stuff that you saw on television. You're talking about your favorite Marvel movies. You're doing an audio drama of some sort. You are telling a book or reading a book, or it's just storytelling, and it's like just basically pure entertainment. Now, a really good podcast can figure out a way to merge both those worlds together. And no matter which side you're on, when it comes to an audio podcast, really good storytelling, really comes in handy no matter what kind of podcast you're doing. I do believe that actually storytelling was one of the very first forms of early communication. We shared stories, and that's how people remembered things, was all through stories. You know that most people will not remember all kinds of statistics and facts and data. If you just threw out like facts and data all the time on your show, chances are people are not going to remember those fine details. But if somehow you weave them into a story and used storytelling, the audience has a higher percentage of actually remembering what you said on your show. With movies and television, it's much easier to tell stories because you have this whole visual landscape. You can show the audience something on the screen, something majestic, something amazing. You can show them all this wonderful stuff. But with an audio podcast like we are doing right now, you have to captivate the audience with just your words and things you're saying. Now, how do you really do that? Now, speaking of films and movie making, one of the greatest movie makers and directors of our time, he writes amazing script dialogue. And in his movies, we are glued to the screen to what these characters are just saying. How do you do it? They're actually showing something. You are glued to what the characters are physically saying, and that is none other than Quentin Tarantino. Now, have you seen any of his movies? A lot of them are kind of graphic. There are a lot of gore, a lot of blood and guts, things like that. But they do have very rich and very in-depth dialogue. Now, how does he do that? Because when you watch his movies, you're like literally glued to the screen listening to these characters have a conversation. So one of his most popular or the most popular films that Quentin Tarantino has ever done has got to be Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction came out in the early 90s or mid 90s. I believe I was in high school when I went to go see it. And I remember that when I was in high school, another student or another friend of mine said they went to see this movie called Pulp Fiction. And they were telling me all about it, how crazy it was. It was like something they've never seen before, how it was an awesome movie and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, I got to check this thing out for myself. And I checked it out. And I remember watching it. And I was like, even from the very first scene in the movie, it was like I was so glued to what the characters were saying. For some reason, I was like, wow. Usually when there's a lot of like talking heads on the screen, a lot of dialogue usually written in a movie or a television show, a lot of times we all kind of tune out sometimes, unless there's other action to kind of like fill in or splice in the talking parts. But with his movie, there was a lot of talking head scenes. People are talking to each other, and I'm kind of gravitated to what they're saying. Now, why was that? I'm trying to figure out why that is. So here's a clip from Pulp Fiction. Is early on in the movie where I would say the main characters, or kind of the main characters, are having a conversation in a car. And this is the first time you get introduced to these characters on screen, and you're kind of gravitated to what they're saying. Here, check this out.
So tell me again about the hash bar.
Okay, what you want to know?
Hash is legal there, right?
Yeah, it's legal, but it ain't 100% legal. I mean, you just can't walk into a restaurant, roll a joint, and start puffing away. I mean, they want you to smoke in your home or certain designated places.
And those are hash bars.
Yeah, it breaks down like this, okay? It's legal to buy it. It's legal to own it. And if you're the proprietor of a hash bar, it's legal to sell it. It's legal to carry it, but that doesn't matter, because get a load of this, all right? If you get stopped by a cop in Amsterdam, it's illegal for them to search you. I mean, that's the right the cops in Amsterdam don't have.
Oh, man, I'm going. That's all it is to it.
No, baby, you dig it the most. But you know what the funniest thing about Europe is?
What?
It's the little differences. I mean, they got the same over there that they got here, but it's just there, it's a little different.
Example?
All right, well, you can walk into a movie theater in Amsterdam and buy a beer. And I don't mean just like no paper cup, I'm talking about a glass of beer. And in Paris, you can buy a beer in McDonald's. And you know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in Paris?
They don't call it a quarter pounder with cheese?
Oh, man, they got the metric system. They wouldn't know what the a quarter pounder is.
And what do they call it?
They call it Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
That's right.
What do they call a Big Mac?
Big Mac's a Big Mac, but they call it Le Big Mac.
Le Big Mac. What do they call a Whopper?
I don't know. I didn't go on a Burger King. You know what they put on French fries in Holland instead of ketchup?
What?
Mayonnaise. I seen them do it, man. They drown them in that
Yeah.
So as you hear them have their conversation, it's like any two people having a conversation in a vehicle about a particular topic. They're talking about what it's like being in Europe versus being here, things like that. Stuff that it's probably information that us normal people here in America don't really get to hear about or know about. It's conversations that you really can't hear anywhere else, and dialogue that really kind of sucks you in. So how does Quentin Tarantino actually do that? Well, he actually spends a significant amount of time developing his characters. Like literally, he knows the backstory of every single character before they actually get on screen. He knows them so well. He knows their history, their quirks, their motivations. He knows them so well that he can write dialogue that feels so authentic to each character on the movie. The dialogue that he writes for each character is witty, it's sharp, it's also unexpected, which gives it the feel of a natural, realistic conversation. You see, Tarantino has a knack of capturing the rhythm and flow of real conversations, even when his characters are discussing seamlessly mundane topics. The dialogue feels authentic and natural. This naturalism makes his film feel very relatable, and his audience find themselves drawn into the characters he creates. Now along with that, he also likes to add lots of wit and humor into the conversations, which adds the level of entertainment, which makes his films very enjoyable to actually watch on multiple levels. So how does all of this relate to podcasting? Really, if you want to tell great, amazing stories for your podcast, how would you do that? So I have 5 tips on how you can tell better stories for your podcast. Number 1, Know your audience and niche. Now, this is very important. I know it's hard to do if you have like a general discussion show and a general audience show, but you really still should know who your audience really is and who you're talking to. If you understand who your target audience is and tailor your stories to their interests, consider the demographics, preferences, expectations of your listeners. Know your niche also allows you to create the content that resonates with your specific audience. Moving on to number 2, you want to start strong. You want to capture your audience attention from the very beginning. That's kind of what a lot of these good movies do. You notice that like at the very beginning, or even maybe a really good Netflix documentary or Netflix show, really, they really capture you at the very beginning. A compelling and intriguing opening sets the tone for the entire episode or series. You can use a hook from the interview, something that's very, like it really captures the audience attention. Like, ooh, what's that about? Let me try to listen to the show and figure out what it is. Really, you can never catch up to a slow start. So always kind of grab them at the very beginning. Okay, moving on to number 3, use conversational and engaging language. What does this really mean? This means, podcasting is the intimate medium. You're listening to me right now. Usually people listen in headphones or in their car or however they do it, usually just alone. So it feels like a very personal connection with the host and audience. So use conversational language, be relatable, and inject personality into your storytelling. Imagine you're telling a story to a friend. That's kind of how I do this show, to tell you the truth, as I'm actually telling it directly to you. And this will kind of let your natural voice shine through. Okay, so moving on to number 4, you want to create a narrative arc. You see, most stories usually come in 3 parts: a beginning, a middle, and an end. You want to structure your podcast episodes with a clear narrative, introduce your main idea or story. You want to kind of build tension throughout the entire episode. And then at the end, you kind of want to provide a satisfying resolution. This structure helps maintain a sense of progression and keeps listeners engaged from start to finish, which is what we really want to do, is get someone to push play and continue all the way through till the very end. And the 5th and final way on how to use good storytelling for your podcast is to incorporate sound and podcast production elements, maybe sound effects, music beds, other kind of things you can kind of throw in there to kind of like add depth, atmosphere, and emotion to your stories. But you got to be careful here. Do not overwhelm the narrative, because sometimes a little can go a long way. Some people dump 1,000 sound effects in their show, and that can be too much. It can be too distracting from actually what you're talking about in the story you're trying to share. So remember that storytelling is an evolving skill. Listen, it doesn't happen overnight. Practice makes perfect. Listen, practice what you do. You should practice with each episode. That's why people on episode 100 are usually better than their very first episode. You want to pay attention to the listener feedback, analyze what works well, and you want to refine your storytelling techniques through practice, of course. Experiment with different things, play around. Listen, your podcast is not set in stone. You can do it however you want to do it. You can change things around, mix it up. Hey, listen, it's your podcast. You are the captain of your podcast ship. Make an amazing show that you are proud of, an amazing show that you would want to listen to. And remember that storytelling is an art form that we all should do with any kind of podcast we have. Telling good stories will help engage the audience and make them want to listen to more episodes, because you have told them something that they can personally not get anywhere else. That makes an amazing podcast. Hey, thank you once again for listening. You know what? If you have any problems creating your podcast, maybe need some one-on-one help to figure out the problems maybe you're dealing with, you always email me at podtasticaudio@gmail.com, and I will respond with my best answers, trying to figure out the problems that you might be having with your show. And I'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening.